Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to host such capable and prominent debaters on this discussion. Looking at the Arabian Spring, looking at what may await Greece, we realize how important this discussion is taking place in a theater. Theater initially being invented or founded in order to rehearse democracy. May I thank the IWM, Institute of Human Science. May I thank the Erste Stiftung and Der Standard. I hope you have an interesting discussion. Go on.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, also in the name of Erste Foundation, it's great that you all are here. Sunday morning im Akademietheater. It's great to have a partnership with Burgtheater, Der Standard, Institut für die Wissenschaften vom Menschen, and Erste Stiftung to bring such honorable people to Vienna and to bring them here on stage. On stage where in these days they play Chekhov, Platonov, which lasts about 5 hours. Don't be afraid. But you see, you know, this old world which is getting a bit, falling a bit down. I think this is also the topic of today. They play in these days Thomas Bernhard, einfach kompliziert. So, and on Monday, Mr. Hälfte will sing Ich brauch kein Pflanz. So you can decide which one is closer to the topic of today. We are happy that we enjoy very much this partnership because with both institutions, Institut für die Wissenschaften vom Menschen, as with their Standard, we have also additional collaboration projects about which we're very happy. So in the name of Erste Foundation, enjoy Sunday morning. Thank you very much.
The last one before the real thing. Just to add a few words of welcome on behalf of one of the organizers, the Institute for Human Sciences. The names of others and our name, as complicated as it may be, you already know by heart. But today's discussion is special. 20 years ago, a eruption of freedom in the eastern part of Europe brought or changed the face of Europe to the better, or at least to the better for those of us who believe that Europe should be democratic and that democracy should be deliberating or liberal. 22 years later, the situation seems to change a bit. Not everywhere, but in some places, the economic crisis, the problems of integration cause reactions which look and sometimes really are dangerous to the success we had 20 years ago. They threaten to change the face of Europe again. So you will see a prominent round to discuss these questions. The chairman of the discussion will be Charles Taylor, the permanent fellow and the chairman of the board of the Institute for Human Sciences, and he will introduce the topic and the speakers. Thank you.
So welcome to another great debate sponsored by the Institute for Human Sciences together with Erste Stiftung and Der Standard. In this case, on the future of liberal democracy. And we have four extremely interesting people from different directions. Let me introduce you to them, then to you first, and then I'll call on them in that order to speak. So it's first Emma Bonino to my right, who is a member of the European Parliament and member of the Italian Senate, and she's a member of the prominent member of the Italian Radical Party, and she's the winner of the North-South Prize. Now, over there on my far left, Ronald Dworkin, who was professor for a long time, professor of jurisprudence at Oxford and author of a great number of books in that field, and who is now in both London and New York, in different in positions also in law, and who is the winner of the Holberg International Memorial Prize. And then George Soros, and I don't know where to start with him because he's such a well-known figure as both a financier but also as a philanthropist who's done an immense amount for the transition from communism to democracy. And he still is chairman of the foundation, Soros Foundation, and the Open Society Institute, and he carries on his work in a very remarkable way. And then on my extreme right, I mean just geographically, Guy Verhofstadt, who's also a member of the European Parliament and formerly was Prime Minister of Belgium, and who has a great many awards that I wouldn't be able to read. The list is so long. So these are the four speakers. And now I'm going to ask each to speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll start a debate among the panelists. So first of all, Signora Bonino, would you like to start speaking?
Yeah, the question or the issue that we are debating, in my opinion, is one of the most relevant on our time, which means where are we going? And as nations, but particularly also as Europeans. And I think that one of the issues that open society or liberal democracy stand for, among other things, is the capacity to tell the truth and to help people to face reality, even if they are harsh or they are very demanding. Now, I'm afraid we don't stand up to this principle. And so we are in some way, for political reasons, trying to tell people not the truth, but something more acceptable. I wouldn't say more pleasant, but definitely more manageable. For instance, we are not we, but anyhow, we are resorting to a very intensive use of the scapegoat theory for facing our problem. One of the most normal scapegoat, for instance, in my country, but I think I can go more general, is the immigrants that are responsible for mostly everything. Microcriminality, they are stealing our jobs, eventually also our wives. They are the one who don't make our city clean, and so on and so forth. The fact is that we have seen it recently on the Mediterranean crisis. And in fact, what we have been saying more and more is a sort of apocalyptic visions which distort reality. We have been calling and naming of a human tsunami coming from the South Mediterranean. Frankly, they are 25,000 up to now, that for a entity of 500 million people is not exact 0.02, for instance. And all what is happening in the Mediterranean, at least in my country, has been seen only through the prism of immigration. In so doing, we are not facing reality, which means that, for instance, due to demographic decline, we need immigrants. And we need immigrants more and more. And even my government, which is not so inclusive of immigrants, let's put it mildly, had to write in the national reform paper sent to Brussels, they had to write small in a footnote, page 74, that anyhow Italy needs 250,000 more immigrants per year in the next 10 years, which makes 2,500,000. Which means that instead of sitting down and explaining to people that they are also an opportunity and of course also a challenge, but that we need them, so that we need an integration policy with all the mistakes that we can make, but we need to face this reality, we are simply denying it and saying everybody out, we don't need them, and so on and so forth. I could make several examples. The other is on Europe, which is the other thing, and I will stop here. That is a great worry to me. And I think that also Europe is facing a major crisis, mostly a value crisis. We don't stand up to our values. And secondly, a governance crisis. And in all this financial crisis and the debate of the proper northern country and lousy southern people, I am afraid that we have a crisis not only in Athens, but also we have a governance crisis in Brussels. And we have to face the fact that the European project either moves forward in a very speedy way to a more political integration, or frankly, we are doomed to fail what we have been building up to now. So we have a crisis at national level, driven by populism and easy answers to very tough questions, that brings you a lot of vote. Fear is a major tool to win election. If you want to lose election, which is an issue in which I am expert, I can teach in many universities. For instance, you run next election touching on immigrants, rule of law, and for sure I will lose the election. But I wonder if we as political leaders, we are unwilling to touch tough issues. Who is supposed to touch these issues? My aunt? My mother? Who? And as my brother said, we pay you to touch and deal with difficult issues. The easy one, we deal it ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. So, I'll call on Ronald Dworkin to carry on.
We have problems with democracy. As Churchill said, there is no other form of government, but we have to recognize, at least today, the essential weaknesses in this form of government. One of these weaknesses is transparent in the title of this session, liberal democracy. The difficulty is, we see this as a great threat in North Africa, but it's a threat every place we celebrate democracy, is that liberalism is no longer popular among the demos. Rights of immigrants, which we've just talked about, are a liberal cause, but they cannot be sustained by democratic means, at least given the present spread of popular opinion. Now, I think that there's a deeper reason for this, and the deeper reason lies in the, let's say, inability of the masses of people, those who count as voters, to understand the complexity of political issues. We are, in the United States particularly, dominated by media like Fox News, who of course do not aim at the truth. The point of free speech was never to aim at truth. They aim to use the privilege of free speech, absolutely indispensable in a democracy. They aim to use it to manipulate. The result of the effectiveness of manipulation in a democracy like ours, dominated by media and inattention, is confusion. I want to give you examples of mistakes. They're patently mistakes, which are nevertheless enjoy great currency throughout the popular press and throughout politics as a whole. The first of these confusions has to do with liberty. People now have come, in the United States particularly, to embrace two propositions. The first is that liberty is a matter of transcendent value. Above all, we must be a free people. We must enjoy liberty. The second proposition is a certain definition of what liberty is. It's the definition presented by famous philosophers, John Stuart Mill, Isaiah Berlin, John Rawls. This holds that people's liberty is a matter of their freedom to do what they want without constraint by government. Now, these two propositions put together are poisonous. They give us the anthem of the libertarian movement. They give us the song of a apparently influential political movement in the United States called the Tea Party. The idea is that whenever government takes over some area, for example, to provide public services or to run some essential utility like railroads, that whenever that happens, people are, of course, given less power to do what they want, and that is a diminution of their liberty. Now, that's a deep confusion. If we want liberty to be a value, then we can't define liberty in that mechanical way. We have to pick out the liberties that really matter and say government does wrong when it invades those values. The whole question of taxation is another example. Why do people whose own taxes would not be raised hate the idea that taxes on the rich should be increased? It's an apparent paradox. And I think, again, it comes from a mistaken idea. And this mistaken idea is that the success of people's lives can sensibly be measured in the amount of money that they've made. Once you accept that idea, then you see taking money away from those who have earned it and giving it to people who have not earned it by way of redistributive programs is a cheat. It's a cheat and a cosmic distortion because it undermines the kind of success at which people should aim. These are two examples. There are many others. I call them mistakes. They're false. One of the problems in our intellectual world today is that we're reluctant to speak of political ideas as true or false. But these ideas are false in the sense, direct sense, that they cannot bear sustained reflection. I therefore propose, and I must do so very quickly now, that the only remedy for these ills in democracy, of course we have no option but democracy. But the only possible remedy is education that will introduce complexity. We have for many decades thought automatically that politics must be kept out of the schoolroom. I think that's a malign, additional mistake. I think we must find a way to introduce the complexity of politics into secondary schools in all our countries in ways that show that these are not simple, crude ideas captured in slogans, well captured in slogans, but are ideas that require sustained attention and further thought. This is a monumental undertaking. It needs pilot studies to see if this can be done. I've mentioned this in various places, always with an enthusiastic reaction, but so far nothing attempted. In any case, I suggest to you, if we want to save liberal democracy, the key is through a more enlightened electorate.
So thank you very much. And now I'll ask George Soros to.
Well, I think that most of you will agree that the European Union is in deep trouble, that there is something going fundamentally wrong, and we are heading towards some kind of a crisis. I think that, and I think most of you actually agree that it's actually centered around the euro. It's called the euro crisis. It's a kind of financial crisis that is really developing. It's foreseen. Most people realize it, and yet it is still inexorably developing. And the authorities are actually engaged in buying time. And yet, time is working against them. So this is the present, at the core of the present crisis. Now, I think Emma Bonino went to the heart of the matter, that the open society, a liberal democracy, needs to be based on a better understanding of reality, but actually a complete understanding is unattainable. Reality is always more complicated than our understanding. And since our understanding and people's decisions play an important role in shaping reality, reality is always unattainable. And perfect knowledge is unattainable. Yet, getting closer to it, understanding it, or a better understanding, is infinitely superior to misunderstanding. And the prevailing arrangements are always based on some kind of misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding needs to be corrected. That, I think, is the fundamental principle on which open society is built. And the European Union has been, I think, a really impressive exercise of trying to put that ideal into practice. And it was brought about by a process of what Karl Popper calls piecemeal social engineering. There was a group of far-sighted statesmen who realized that Europe needs to be more integrated and also realized the difficulty of bringing it into being, and so decided on taking one step at a time, setting a limited objective, gathering political support for that idea, setting a timetable, and then implementing it, knowing full well that that arrangement is bound to be inadequate, and a further step will be necessary. And actually taking the first step will make it clear that the second step is needed. And that's how the coal and steel community was developed into the European Union. And it worked. And it was a self-reinforcing process. It gathered momentum. So it was a fantastic success. But it seems to have run out of steam. And in fact, if you look at history, it kind of, the process culminated with the reunification of Germany and the Maastricht Treaty and the creation of the euro. That was the crowning achievement. And then there was a period of sort of sort of stability, but no progress. And now we are in a process of disintegration. So we had actually a process very similar to what you can observe in financial markets, bubbles. A boom-bust process, which is initially self-reinforcing, but eventually unsustainable, and then begins to reverse itself and ends in a crash. So it's a strange but understandable similarity because of the role of misconceptions or mistaken interpretations. We really need to now go back and try to analyze where this misconception arose. And it is actually in connection with the euro. Because the people who brought it into existence knew that it was an incomplete currency because it created a currency union without a political union. And in the long run, that's not sustainable. But they had a reason to believe that when that becomes apparent, the political will can be generated to take the next step forward and to bring about the missing element. To be technical about it, you created a common central bank, but you didn't have a common treasury, no common fiscal policy. So that was the recognized lack. But as I say, you could hope that this could be brought about in due course. There were also other deficiencies in the euro that were not recognized and even now are not fully recognized. It was then assumed that any imbalance or discrepancy would be brought about, it has to come from the public sector. And it was assumed that the private sector, the financial markets, tend towards equilibrium and can correct their own mistakes. And actually, as we discovered in the financial crisis of 2008, and that is not the case. And the idea was that the euro would bring about convergence. And actually, it created divergence because it allowed the interest rates of the various countries to converge. But the effect of that on the private sector was to bring about real estate booms in countries like Spain, which then weakened the competitiveness of Spain. So instead of converging, you had the divergence. At the same time, Germany, which was facing the problem of reunification, had to absorb the cost of reunification, was under pressure, and actually became more competitive, made an arrangement with the trade unions that they would limit their demand for wage increases in order to preserve their jobs. So Germany became more competitive, and the countries at the periphery became less competitive. So instead of convergence, you had divergence. And then you had the financial crisis. And it was necessary to guarantee that no important bank or financial institution would be allowed to fail after the failure of Lehman Brothers. And at that point, Angela Merkel insisted that this guarantee should be not joint, but several. In other words, each country had to look after its own institutions. And that was actually, in retrospect, the first step towards putting into motion a self-reinforcing process of disintegration. And since then, it has been moving further. And here, somehow, the authorities forgot the first principle of open society, and namely that all our constructs are bound to be flawed and must be open to correction. The definition of an open society is an imperfect society, recognizing its imperfection and holding itself open to improvement. But actually, the euro had no provision for correction. There was no arrangement for any country leaving the euro, which in the current circumstances is probably inevitable. So that was when things really started going wrong. And I think one has to recognize this. And we face really, or Europe faces a real choice. You look for an alternative on a national level or on a European level. And on the whole, people are looking for something, but they're looking for it on a national level. Yet, I think the survival of the European Union is of vital interest to all. So you need to generate you need a plan B. There is no plan B at the moment, and that's why the authorities are sticking to the status quo and insisting on preserving the existing arrangements instead of recognizing that there is fundamental flaws that need to be corrected. You need a plan B. And that is what is now missing. And this has to be impressed on the authorities, I think, by the public. I think all of us sitting here and everywhere should tell our leaders that there has to be a European solution, and that solution is not to stick to the status quo, which cannot be preserved, but to develop a plan B.
Thank you very, very much. And now, Guy Verhofstadt.
Yeah. First of all, I have to tell you that I found it a very strange invitation to come to hear about the crisis in the liberal democracy at the moment that there are several 100,000 of millions of people aspiring for liberal democracy in the northern of Africa, in the Middle East, in Syria, in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Bahrain. So I think that we have to have two debates. The future of the liberal democracy in countries that have a liberal democracy, and there is a crisis. And then the fact that in a number of other countries where there is no liberal democracy, people are aspiring liberal democracy and are trying to create it, even with the loss of their lives today. Because let's not make this mistake. These revolutions in Tunisia, in Egypt, and in other countries of the Middle East are about liberal democracy. We thought from the beginning, let's be aware, it's certainly Muslim fundamentalism who is behind. But it was totally the opposite. When Bouazizi died, on the funeral, there was not the green flag of Islam. It was the red flag of Tunisia who was there. And also all these young people on Tahrir Place, it's very interesting. I had the opportunity to talk with them 2 times, to hear them, because they are talking about freedom of speech, liberal democracy, a parliamentary system, creating political parties. And I can tell you, it's an enormous, fantastic period. It's like in '89 in the center and eastern of Europe. Every day there is a new liberal democratic party created. Maybe they shall not combine forces in the elections, but that can happen. But that is what it is about today. So it's a little bit a strange title to hear. We have a liberal democratic societies and we are in crisis. Well, around us, they are still believing in liberal and democratic solutions. Always like that. When you have it, you find it normal, and you try to start to find something new. And when you don't have it, certainly a liberal democracy, then you know what the exact value is. Means that there is liberal democracy is going in the right direction. There is China, no liberal democracy. There is, for the moment, Russia, who is more and more becoming an authoritarian system again. An organized democratic system with the party of Mr. Putin, and then two, a left-wing and a right-wing party, and with the impossibility to create a new one. You know that a few days ago the Russian authorities refused a new political party, emerging a new political party of Mr. Kashan, of Mr. Nemtsov, Mr. Rychov. So what their approach of a democracy is you limit the number of players. A left one, a right-wing one, and the ruling party in the center. So we have to have a more, I think, a precise definition of what we are talking about. I hope that we are talking about here about in Europe, in ourselves, liberal crisis and liberal democracy in Europe. And that's nevertheless a strange title, also for us, because you remember that 12 years ago, a book was published that everybody of you have certainly seen, or maybe read even, The End of History of Francis Fukuyama. And that was at that moment a bestseller, because he said mainly, okay, it's the end of history, liberal democracy is now the rule everywhere in the world, and a free market economy. And since he wrote that book, in fact, what we have seen is that history started, really. So it was the opposite what happened. We got the 9/11 attacks and the political crisis and the crisis of maybe liberal democratic societies. We got an economic crisis with Lehman Brothers in 2008. We got now a technological crisis with the Fukushima disaster a few months ago. So instead of the end of history, we show in fact, the opposite. Maybe the beginning of a new period in history. And I think personally that the problem that we are facing today, the liberal democracy in Europe, has mainly to do with the lack of leadership that exists for the moment in Europe and in the European Union. Because politics is about that, and democracy is about that. We can talk about the media, we can talk about a parliamentary system and constitutions and so on, but at the end, it are people who are, and politicians who are in the heart of a political system and of a liberal democratic system. If they are not capable to show a vision, a democratic, a liberal democratic future for the people, well, then there is a crisis. And I think the crisis is mainly that in Europe, a lack of leadership of most of the political leaders in Europe to show the way forward. And the way forward, in my opinion, as in the opinion I think of Mr. Soros, is more European integration, a new step forwards in European integration, and the creation of a real what I call European democratic space, what we don't have today. We have still, we have European Parliament, a European Commission, and a European Council, but that is not a European democratic space as we should have it, because there is no direct link between the citizens at the one side and the European policies at the other side. And this lack of leadership, it translates itself now in what we see every day. And I agree with Mr. Soros. Since October 2008, when Angela Merkel in the office of Mr. Sarkozy refused to have a common policy to attack the financial crisis and to save the European banks, it translates itself in political leaders who are in fact more and more using nationalist and populist rhetoric, thinking that in doing so, they can retain their electorate to go to these populist and nationalist parties. What is a big mistake, naturally, because people are only believing in the original and are not voting for copies. So that's a basic rule in politics, that political parties every time are forgotten. And so I think that that is what we are living through for the moment. Political leaders as Merkel, as Sarkozy, but in every country. Look, in Finland there are the true Finns. In Sweden, for the first time, they have a right-wing, extremist right-wing political party represented in the parliament. In the Netherlands, you have Wilders, who is saying that all Muslims are terrorists mainly. That's the main message what he is giving in the Dutch society. In my country, we had the victory of a Flemish separatist movement. In France, you have Sarkozy trying to say exactly the same what Marianne Le Pen is saying, and people shall vote for Marianne Le Pen. That shall be the outcome. You have Berlusconi, but Mrs. Bonino is here. She's more a specialist in talking about that problem than I am. We have we have political leaders, all political leaders, Merkel, Cameron, Sarkozy, saying a stupid thing as the multicultural society has failed. A society failed. A society cannot fail. Their politics can fail, but not a society. That's a factor society. That is not something that you can discuss on it. You have what's happening in Hungary, for example. Are we following that, the new constitution there? And the media law that was adopted a few months ago. So what we see for the moment is where we need especially European and political leadership inside the European Union, we see exactly happening the opposite. Explaining to the people that problems can better be resolved within the borders, the national borders of the old nation states of the European Union. And we are still sick of nationalism in Europe. We have invented nationalism and we are still sick of nationalism and populism. That's the problem. So I shall end. I think we are on a crossroad in Europe, as Mr. Soros said. Or we are going in the direction of the UN of Europe. There's the United Nations of Europe, a loose confederation of nation states, mainly based on intergovernmental thinking and working. That means between Paris and Berlin and a number of other capitals. Or we are going in a direction of what I call United States of Europe. I know it can be a very tough word, the United States of Europe, but the United States of Europe, that means a federal system. And the main problem today is how can we create this European democratic space inside this European Union. And maybe it can be very strange, but I'm a liberal. I don't like taxes at all. So I am a liberal in the continental sense, not in the American sense. Otherwise, I'm a communist. But okay. I'm a liberal, so I don't like taxes. But mainly, I think to create a real European democratic space, you need a budget of the Union of more than 1%. In the US, the federal state is 23%. So to compare a little bit, the 1% where we are discussing about and the 23% of the federal state in the US. And secondly, you need a direct financing system. You need European taxes. Not more taxes, no, the same that you are paying for the moment to the nation state, you have to pay them in the future to Europe. And at that moment, the public opinion shall be interested in what is happening in the Union.
That people are also allowed to vote for the president.
Yeah, okay, no problem. For me, transnational list, the European president, right. Now we have 3 of them, yeah, because we created all this stuff of the Lisbon Treaty, saying, yeah, Mr. Kiesinger don't know to who to phone. And now he has 3 phone numbers for the moment, so he still not know to who to phone. So I think, but the main problem is that, why I'm saying that about taxation? Because democracy has been created by taxation. It is not enlightened persons who have invented democracy. Democracy has been created far centuries ago by the king asking for money to go to war, and he asked the people to have this money. And the people said, yeah, okay, you can have this money if you give us rights, if you give us a number of freedoms, liberties, and so on. That is the way a parliamentary democratic system has been created. And we have to do exactly the same on the European level against effectively this trend of nationalism and populism. Thank you.
Well, hello. Are we in the period of discussion?
That's right.
Good. I have enough.
A liberal democratic debate.
I have 2 observations about your stirring remarks. One of them is about North Africa and the spring of liberal democracy. I don't think we're having 2 separate discussions, because the discussion we have that focuses on Europe and on the West and on the United States warns of dangers that may be materializing just as we're speaking in North Africa. I'm told by people in Cairo that the army is arresting journalists and that the question of whether this will be a liberal democracy or just popular rule is still a very much open question. And I think we must bear that in mind when we celebrate what's happening there. We might consider how easily we've had problems with liberalism. Now, the paradox I saw in what you said was that you said, we need a United States of Europe. We have a failure of leadership because we are not getting there. We must put nationalism behind us. And everyone in the room applauded you. We have at some point to face the fact that, as I believe, the people of Europe do not want a United States of Europe.
That's not true.
I live half the year in England, and I can tell you.
Well, they don't want Europe at all. They don't want Europe, full stop.
We thought you lived in Europe, you lived in England, so yeah.
Now,
we are talking Europe, you are talking England.
I believe this is a self-selectorate, but the vote in Germany, every time a poll is taken in Germany, or in France, particularly in France, the figures, the enthusiasm for a political Europe decreases. Now, you might say it's a failure of leadership because no one has told them how important it is to have, but people have been trying to tell them, and they say, well, I believe, I hear people trying to tell them, but if in the end, do you think that whether there should be a Europe or not, in the name or under the title of democracy, depends upon what the people, asked to consider the matter, decide? I myself would much prefer a United States of Europe. I think it's a wonderful idea. I agree that economic union and a common currency won't work unless there's a political union. But never underestimate the tragic dilemma of democracy, which is the best ideas are not necessarily the most popular ideas.
No, but political leaders have to lead public opinion and not to follow public opinion. But that is what is happening now.
You have to draw a very sharp line between leading public opinion and ignoring public opinion.
Yeah, I know that. I know.
Okay, so George.
I know that from practice because I lost the last election. So
you come in. Yes.
I think that Mr. Verhofstadt and you also were very right to bring in the Arab Spring as a relevant, very important development. And I'd like to link it up with the Euro crisis by saying it's exactly because you have developments like the Arab Spring where Europe ought to be playing a much bigger role in strengthening it and protecting it and stopping it from deteriorating into something much worse, that you need a European solution for the internal problems of Europe. We are now preoccupied with the internal problems, and we are ignoring, we are not playing the role in the world that Europe ought to play. So this is a reason for a European solution. Mm-hmm. Now, where I agree with you and disagree with you, is not a failure of leadership. It's really where the leadership is coming from. You need leadership from people, from the people of Europe, who tell the leaders that they have got to stop protecting the status quo and find a European solution which involves a revision of the prevailing arrangements. Right now, you only have energy on the nationalist, xenophobic, extreme right public opinion. The pro-European opinion, which I think still dominates, what still is the majority and would be the majority, it's the silent majority.
Yes.
And it's more than just silent, it's actually paralyzed, because being pro-European, the leadership is telling you, you've got to defend the status quo. And that is indispensable. Yeah. So you need a European opinion that is for change, for correcting the mistakes. We need to mobilize. That's where the leadership has to come from. And then you will have leaders to lead us in the right way.
No, I think, George, I just wanted to react on three things. And exactly because I love Europe and I am a pro-European, I cannot stand this Europe. I can't stand it anymore. And I think that, frankly, either we push for change on many fields, or frankly, it's very difficult to be in love with this Europe today. Of course, if you are my generation or my father's generation, they will tell you because this is peace, was the dream of no war among us, and et cetera, but for the young people, this is taken for granted, and so you cannot make them a penny. But that's why I would like to come to plan B. But first, I have three things. On Mediterranean, I've been living in Cairo for 5 years. I speak some Arabic. I've been traveling a lot. And now everybody seems to say, politician, think tank, etc. Oh, how unexpected this revolution. And I think that it was so unexpected because our leadership and establishment, where they know the counterpart of the establishment so well, also because they were there since 30 years, so frankly, you have time to know all the details, that they forgot to understand the country. They really forgot to understand the country. And then when I was saying, listen, anyhow, we are in a sort of a demographic time bomb, and that the situation is totally unstable, and I was supporting dissidents and so on and so forth, but not because they were visionaries or not only because of that, but simply because the situation was totally unstable and untenable. And I'm not sure that they will move directly to liberal democracy. Transition is maybe going to be much more complex, painful, 2 steps forwards, 3 backwards. But what is sure is that nothing will be as it was before. That is the real crucial point. And also in the Eastern Europe, it took, I don't know, years and years to establish a sort of democracy. So it will not be like that. But nothing will be as before. And what is astonishing from the European side is that to an extraordinary event, we are responding with the usual normal tool, a communication, a decision of the Council.
Some millions.
And we have invented now the 3M. Market. Are we going to open the market? I doubt it. Money. There is no money. Mobility. We are just throwing everybody out. So, frankly speaking, it doesn't seem to be one of the major policies. Maybe we have to do some brainstorming instead of this kind of thing. This is for the South Mediterranean. One point on education, I agree, provided that we discuss also the tool of education. Education is not only school. People learn every day. And so don't, in my opinion, underestimate the role of the media. Because media enter into the homes by millions for free every night, day, morning, and et cetera, and to have such a gathering of hundreds of people, I think people have been working for weeks, and you need money, and so on and so forth. On the contrary, the media, be it Mediaset, be it whatever, they enter the homes, how do you say, the case, your homes, for free or whatever, but every day by millions, with always the same, eventually the same slogan. So education goes with different tools, social network, media, TV, etc., etc. Don't underestimate in a liberal democracy the role that they can play, and not always it's a role for opening. It's sometimes different. But we can elaborate later on, but don't underestimate the media, particularly to people who are less, anyhow. Now, plan B. I think you are right, George, because we are in a crossroad. Either we move forward or Europe will disintegrate. And I've been discussing and proposing since a long time a sort of a federation light, right? Which is, because if you tell people, look, I am always astonished. If you look California or Illinois, they have a situation, an economic situation or a financial situation, which is really worse than Greece or Portugal, right? But because the United States is a political union plus a transfer possibility, no one is challenging the dollar crisis. Right. What we are challenging in Europe is exactly because we don't have a minister, we don't have a treasury, etc. We don't have a political union. So I was thinking, why don't we move forward in a sort of, because something has to be done. A possible plan B could be a sort of a federation light, which is not 23% of the tax, it could be 5% or whatever, with foreign policy. Even Trichet has been calling for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow for a Minister of Finances, because evidently it is clear that the crisis, the euro crisis, is not so much in Athens as in Brussels, and it's not so much financial than political. So I think that the moment has come so that we try to push forward, starting from the point, the status quo is untenable, we have to do something. We stand for more integration, exactly because we love, and we stand for the United States of Europe. Why I'm using that slogan? Because it's a provocation, maybe, but also because it's understandable. People understand what it does mean. It means that you elect your president. It means that you have a taxation. Then you make in a European form. But at least the slogan can make even my brother understand what I want, right? Because otherwise I need 25 minutes to explain to him that I don't want a confederation, I want a federation, but I want it light. And then he will not understand anything at all.
I think that talking about the United States of Europe at the present time is utopian, because people are.
What is credible? What is realistic? Wait a moment. Right. All right. What is realistic?
Yeah. What the reality is that people are at the moment moving away rather than to Europe, and all we need to unite on, all we can unite on, is that we ought to have a European solution. I think that talking about federal state or is utopian, and you can't mobilize.
But a European solution, George, is too vague.
But when you said that you need, let's say, a larger European budget, that it shouldn't be 1%, but 3%, that you need some direct taxes, that you should have a certain percentage of VAT go to Europe rather than to the state, or have a financial transaction tax, which would be a European, Europe-wide tax. That the banking system has to be a European banking system guaranteed by a European institution, not a bunch of national banking systems. Those are the steps forward. A bigger treasury. You need, let's say, a larger. You need to increase this new institution, this EFS. It needs to be 3 times as much as big. But then you need some Europe-wide taxes to give it substance. So those are the steps. So that's, I think, that's what Plan B has to be. And I think around that you could have a consensus.
You think it's easier?
Pardon?
In the sense that you think that this Plan B, your Plan B, it's easier. It's easier what you...
Yeah, I think that bringing in United States of Europe and so on goes too far, and it would just be a European extremist group and couldn't get the majority.
So maybe at that point some reasonable people can make the compromise.
Yeah, yeah.
If you've persuaded them. But I want to come back to the question of the primacy of the media. And it seems to me discussions of the really quite awful role of the media in all liberal democracies that I know about tends to overlook one fact. The media are in business. They want people to watch them. They therefore adopt. Rupert Murdoch defended the Labour government in Britain when he thought that was good for his business. The first cause is public opinion, because the media will pander to public opinion so long as they think that that will get them larger ratings. Now, I say that, and it's overlooked. The media does not have its own political constituency. It wants advertisers. Politicians raise in the United States unbelievable amounts of money. Why? Because they want to buy television time. Why? Because through television time, they can influence public opinion. At the bottom, it's what people are like. It's what people are ready to pay attention to that's going to determine what the media present to them. There's no shortcut to that. That's why I say that whether you're talking about Plan A or Plan B, whether you want a UN of Europe or a United States of Europe or something in between, if you really believe in democracy, you've got to start with education. You've got to start with getting people to have a taste for thinking, a taste for complexity, a taste not to be entertained, but to be informed. If people develop that taste, you will find the media much more congenial to you.
Guy.
Well, maybe it's the moment to explain a little bit to the audience how things are working now when we prepare all these next steps and how difficult it is. Because the next steps, we can describe them. It's mainly what Mr. Soros said and what Mr. Bonino is saying. But you have to know that we are for the moment fighting with the European Parliament, where I am the group's leader of the Liberal and Democratic group, third group in the Parliament, to convince the Council, the Member States, to give some power to Brussels concerning the Stability Pact. And say the Stability Pact didn't work. Why it didn't work? Because it is the Council, the Member States themselves, who are in fact managing and controlling. And I don't believe, I'm always saying, criminals can penalize themselves, but maybe that's exaggerated. But that's the main problem. So we, with the Parliament, have proposed to change that and to have a system in which the European Commission, European Central Bank, is in charge and in the driver's seat. And this is not acceptable. So that's why we are now, that's the reason why there is for the moment no package on economic governance and no conclusion on that at the moment where you're in the middle of a big debt crisis and a Greek crisis. So only that, saying what everybody found very normal, that it should be independent institutions that should be in the lead to control the Stability Pact, is already a step too far. A step too far. So, and we are not talking about all the other steps, because if there is somebody who is saying, oh, we want more than 1%, I want more than 1%. No, that's impossible. 1% is really the limit. You have to know the United States started with 1%, but that was in the 18th century, naturally, and not now. In the 18th century, they started with 1%. That was exactly like the US started. If you are saying here in Europe, we want a European bond market. Well, it's normal that if you have one currency, one monetary union, you have one bond market. And not 17 bond markets and 17 economic strategies and 17 different governments doing different things with the Greek debt crisis as the result. You say, no, that's not possible. Well, in the US, Hamilton realized the bond market in 1795. 1795 was one of the first things he realized. Hamilton, and it was a big fight against Jefferson. Hamilton said, we want the bond market. Jefferson said, no bond market. It was 13 member states at that moment, 13 states in the US after the Convention of Philadelphia. And at the end, they found a solution. They created the bond market. It's a deep bond market that exists still today. And Washington was created as a compensation for Jefferson, because it didn't exist at that moment in the northern of Virginia. So they have already, since the 18th century, what we are still discussing on. And it becomes really a problem in the sense that now American leaders are saying the last 4 or 5 days what we Europeans have to do. Mr. Lipsky, the head for quite a short period still, I think, of the International Monetary Fund, 3 days ago. What he's saying, these Europeans have to stop to debate between each other. They have to create a political union and an economic union. IMF, are not the federalists of Europe. It's not extremists there in the International Monetary Fund. 2 days ago, Mr. Guy, Minister of Finance, what he's saying, exactly the same. The Americans have to stop the debate between each other about this and have to create an economic union, because that's the real reason of the crisis around Greece. It's true that Greece have bad finances, have corruption and so on, but there is no real economic union. That is what the financial markets are testing today. They are not testing the rate and the credibility of Greece. We know it's zero. But what they are testing for the moment, is the capability of the European Union to create a political and economic union. And this crisis, and in that way, what is now how can we go further? How can we go further? Well, it's the crisis who is the trigger. If there is more crisis, then political leadership shall be obliged to do something. They shall not do it by themselves. There are no longer François Mitterrands or Helmut Kohls today. Helmut Kohl, he abolished the Dutch mark, he introduced the euro. Do you see today German leadership who is capable, have the courage to do that? That doesn't exist longer. He knew that that was, in fact, a positive thing for Germany, that German economy should benefit from that. And we see it today, that they are benefiting from that. And that is what is lacking today. Today there is no Sarkozy, no Merkel, no Cameron who is saying, okay, let's give some additional power to Brussels, let's combine forces, let's create a European banking system, let's give real powers to the European banking authorities. No, they do exactly the opposite. And the only thing what we have to hope that is that this crisis obliges them to go in the right direction, because it's an opportunity, a crisis. Don't waste the crisis, we always say. Well, this crisis, no, don't waste the crisis. And this crisis, we can waste them, and that means that we have to establish a number of institutions that until now were unthinkable in Europe. The EFSF that we have created, Mr. Soros, 2 years ago, unthinkable. Then, yeah, there is a crisis. Mrs. Merkel said, no, we are not solidary.
What about the no bailout clause?
But no bailout clause, everybody knows.
In one night.
Yeah. No, but what I want to say is that crisis is the trigger. A moment is there to go forward with a number of ideas. But the problem is still that we need leaders who are willing to do so. And we don't have them for the moment. Maybe there is an opportunity with the European Parliament. The European Parliament has now more powers. We are co-legislator on every topic in the European Union. So an international trade agreement is not applicable if the European Parliament doesn't agree. A new European banking authority system is It's not applicable if the European Parliament doesn't agree. Economic governance package, not applicable if the European Parliament doesn't agree. So we have to mobilize this European Parliament to do so. And that's what I'm doing every day, trying that the 736 members of this Parliament are thinking pro-European and not longer listening to the phone calls they receive from Berlin, Paris, or other capitals in Europe.
I mean, the important thing to realize that in a crisis, the impossible becomes possible. Yeah. It's a revolutionary situation. Usually, those situations go wrong, actually, but nevertheless, it creates this opportunity for something positive. And therefore, I think the important thing is to realize that we are in a situation somewhat similar to the Arab Spring or to the collapse of the Soviet system. Those are revolutionary situations. Certainly the Soviet thing went wrong. We didn't create an open society. You now have restoration of authoritarian regimes and so on. So here is an opportunity, and the impossible becomes possible, and we need to generate a public debate that will force the authorities to start thinking in those terms and to abandon the status quo and to bring about institutional changes without a collapse, because we are on the verge, let's face it, we are on the verge of a economic collapse, yes, which starts, let's say, in Greece, but it can easily spread. And the financial system remains extremely vulnerable. I could go into details. We are on the edge of collapse, and that's the time to recognize the need for change. So it's a revolutionary situation, not that different from the Arab Spring.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about Plan A and Plan B, and no doubt Plan C for Europe. But there's a very practical question I'm interested in all you Europeans' opinion about. Referenda. When there was a real chance for a large step forward towards the Europe you want, was the consideration of the Constitution. I agree the Constitution was very elaborate, hard to understand, hard to present. It was you ought to be given a medal if you actually read it. But still, there was a meta debate, a debate about how the procedure would take place. And the question was, should there be a referendum in the individual nations of Europe with the understanding that nations would not go forward unless a majority of their citizens approved? Now, when I hear you all talking about the failure of leadership, it sounds to me as if maybe you think leaders ought to take a step without public endorsement, a revolutionary step, a constitutional step, without a majority in a referendum, in the hope that in time to come, looking back, people would say, we're glad you did it. Now that is certainly a possibility. Many great historical events have taken place in approval in hindsight. But if you actually are talking about that or expecting that, that really does require a footnote to the idea of liberal democracy, because there is a clear sense in which that would not be a democratic means of moving towards the Europe that you want.
Well, if you had any kind of referendum, it would have to be a Europe-wide referendum. If you have national referenda, you're asking for a national response which is going to give you a negative response as far as Europe is concerned.
There is, can I just say, that would be, in a way, begging the question, because you only are entitled to have a European referendum in which the voters of one country can outvote the voters of another if you already have a political union. The idea of a political union is the idea of a demos,
but look,
a majority of which...
Given what you just said about the media, and the fact that in Europe the media is still national, that and if you look at the debate of where Germany is on who is at fault and how things ought to be solved, and the Greeks, they are at loggerheads. I mean, they're directly against each other. So if you put it to referendum in Greece and in Germany, you cannot possibly get a positive outcome. So I don't think that referenda are in any case appropriate right now. But if they were, they would have to be on a Europe-wide basis. And the debate, and this is really where some innovation has to take place, the debate has to be a Europe-wide debate, which it isn't at the moment. It's really bringing the Greek view and the Spanish view and the German view into the same discussion instead of having separate discussions in the separate countries.
But how,
Yeah,
why would people...
What I wanted to tell you, back to referenda. If you go back to the referendum on the so-called constitution, that frankly speaking, it was a little bit difficult to fall in love with that kind of paper called constitution. And I think that one of the reasons, and most of people never read that famous constitution. Anyhow, if you look at the dynamic of the referendum, particularly the one who voted against, was mostly connected to national
local politics.
issues.
Yeah.
And the French leadership, for instance, who called, some of them, even the socialists, called against, etc., was an anti-Chirac referendum. And it was an anti-Chirac vote.
Actually, the Constitution and the referenda that followed are exactly the political process that is now bankrupt.
This is what I'm saying.
Because it was a very closely negotiated, very complex document, presented to the people, take it or leave it. It's exactly here you need the change. Namely, if you listen to where Germany is, you have to recognize that, let's say, if you have a common currency, it's got to be a strong currency, because Germany cannot live, given their history and their attitude. They want a stable currency. It has to be a strong currency. So so that has to dictate of what is possible. We started off by saying an open society means recognizing reality. That is a reality. At the same time, people in Spain, and particularly young people, they want jobs. And so you need a solution that allows them to have jobs. So that's another reality. And when you take all those realities into account, then Plan B would emerge. That would give you that result that the people are demanding. And people in different countries are demanding different things.
No, but but just to go back to the question of maybe we need a Philadelphia process, let's say, starting with the Philadelphia initiative and the short constitution and so on to build upon it and etc. But definitely the question of then to be supported by national referenda, that is totally wrong, because they can be, let's say, diverted to national politics at that moment. I do remember that in France it was all the polemics against the plombier polonais, the Polish plumber. No. Of course, there was no Polish plumber showed up in Paris. And by the way, they are badly needed. If you know some plumber, Polish who would like to move to France, please send us an address, because they are badly needed everywhere anyhow. But that was the national politics, and it was an anti-Chirac vote in one way or another. So maybe if we think on an institution, definitely it has to be at least at European level, the question of referendum, which has also a lot of difficulties, beginning with the language. A European debate with several languages is not so easy. So, but then at least that. But finally, let me tell you something, that in fact, if we don't raise a little bit above the national politics, all this issue will be jeopardized exactly for the result of the incoming election. And so you need some vision anyhow. You need to be a visionary anyhow, because otherwise you will be simply trapped back by the national emergency in a few months' time.
It's very hard for me. I just haven't added up the numbers that you have, but if a referendum would lose for national reasons in all the big countries, I think a Europe-wide referendum would lose.
No.
That's, can I give you the example what in France happened the last time? So there are a number of all the parties participate. One of the parties which was participating is the MoDem, Mouvement Démocratique of Beirut, who is known as the most pro-European force in France, and got enormous good in the polls forecasts. And at a certain moment, Beirut decided then to change and to use this European election as a national test against Sarkozy.
But the question,
he published a book and so on. He lost the election, and the pro-European Ecolo Greens of Danny Cohn-Bendit picked up this message, and they won. So people, when there is a European election, want to hear what the European answers are that people, that the political parties are giving. So it's not necessary so that if you lose, for example, national referendums, on Europe, I think a Europe-wide referendum you can win. And why? Because people are not stupid. Let me give one example. In the polls you can find it, in the Eurobarometer like we call it. People are in favor of a European defense. They are saying, they know that 27 armies were doing 27 exactly the same things and strategies. We have 2 million of soldiers in Europe, you know that? 2 million. The US have 1.4 million soldiers. And I can tell you they can do a little bit more operations than we with our European armies. We have an, but the analyses are very clear. We have a capacity of 10% of the Americans, but we have 2 million soldiers, and they have 1.4. Diplomats, you know how many diplomats we have in Europe? 93,000 diplomats. In the US, 25,000 diplomats. Can tell you, influence of the US worldwide is a little bit bigger than our 93,000. On monetary policy, you know how many people there are working? A little bit more than 10,000 in the Federal Reserve Board. In Europe, 25,000 people working on the monetary policies, and where we have one currency zone. On European research, because we have no patent for the moment, we pay 10, 12 times more than an American company who is making to launch a new. And that is the things that we have to explain to people, that only Europe can solve the problems. Could you imagine that the financial crisis happened in 2008 without the euro? What was happening? Everywhere devaluations. Inside the lire, the peseta, I don't know, a number of other currencies. It was a mess without
without the euro. And then the internal market. Why is the German economy booming for the moment? Because of the reforms, Hartz 1 to 4, but also because of the internal market. Because they can now export their goods without any monetary borders. And that are the arguments we have to use. And the problem is that our national leaders have not longer the guts to use these arguments and are pleased to say, okay, it are the Roma who are bad people, so let's take measures. Or there are coming too many Tunisians in Italy, 25,000. We found a solution for 350,000 Kosovars in Europe, and it worked. It worked at that time. Now it is impossible to have 25,000 Tunisians, and then there are measures taken by France, and then the Danish are saying, oh, it's the moment now, okay, to reinstall the border controls also in our country. So that is what's happening. That is that the leaders are not longer using the arguments were there. The European dividend was there. A big company, a European company, how they are doing it? They are pulling together a number of services. And what we are saying to the people, no, it's better done when we do it in 27 places, different places. That's what we are saying for the moment.
Now I know the answer to the legitimacy problem that worries me. you should have national referenda rather than Europe being wide, but you should go to every country.
Yeah. My German is bad, that's a problem, I think.
You've got a lot of energy, you showed us that several times.
Well, there is a substantial agreement and then some deep disagreement on the panel. I mean, I think that what came out from just about everybody, starting with you and then with Ronnie and so on, was that there are these deep misunderstandings in the electorate, illusions. Ronnie was talking about illusions or mistakes. And then it was put by George in a slightly different way in terms of this whole theory that we've always got it wrong. But what we can do sometimes is to see some of the things that are wrong and correct them, this idea of a self-correcting system. And I think that's tremendously plausible in the case of the Euro crisis. I mean, I'm an observer from outside. I listen to the debates in Austria and in Germany, and it's always put in a moralizing language. You know, these Greeks, they're profligate, they're spending money left, right, and center, and we are properly disciplined. Are we going to... It's like some uncle with a profligate nephew, and he's forced to pay his gambling debts and so on. And the real situation, I discover when I talk to people like all of you and like George who know the situation, is that it's in their interest to pay. That, you know, the German economy wouldn't go as well if they let the whole thing
And in the interest of their banks too.
In the interest of their banks.
Don't forget.
So that is that's the challenge. How do you get that understanding
But
across?
the question is that the market are so, and financial market and the banks are so integrated, right? What is not is the governance that can put some order on this question. So you have 27 economies or 27 governments and so on. But then the markets and financial markets go on their own way, and they are so integrated that the collapse of Greece brings the collapse or the damage to the German banks or UK banks or whatever, because it's so interconnected. What it seems to me worries is that the question of we didn't touch, but if you want more Europe or European tax or more sovereignty, let's say, to Europe, you need also a little bit more of accountability. And so democracy steps in. If you want to give more sovereignty to somebody, this somebody has to be accountable through, in our system, through elections. And even to elect the president of the commission directly, it seems something in between a crime and a sin, which is the worst scenario. At least a crime is a crime, a sin is a crime. No. The simple proposal to elect the president of the commission or the president, or anyhow, give the people some, let's say, power to choose who, and this who or he or she has to be so accountable to. That is nowhere to be seen as a debate. And I see it very difficult that people will accept to give more power or pieces of sovereignty to Brussels or whatsoever if these people are not accountable through the normal system. So I think that also this kind of accountability and this kind of, because also, you know, it's a question of connection, of link, of feeling that this president is us. Is not simply somebody appointed by so-and-so, but it's us, it's Europe. We elected him. We can be proud or not proud of him. For the moment, all this process is very bureaucratic, and the only one elected is the European Parliament, who is now competing, unfortunately, with the national parliament. For instance, I was strongly against in giving more power to the national parliament, because I thought that that was another way not to connect more with Europe, but to add a competition. And I think we wanted to have more power to the European Parliament and to have them accountable. We choose another way, which is to give a little bit more power to, or ambitions, let's say, to the national parliament, who now are competing with the European one. So we are adding another layers instead of streamlining and simplifying. But anyhow, in going through this more political union, which I think it's badly needed, and maybe the crisis at the moment of new thinking, or can open the possibility of the question of democratic accountability is really a serious question, because you have to identify people with somebody. And in the democratic system, this identification comes through election, comes to vote. So that is one of the aspects that has to get into this new thinking, to have people, elections at European level. Because for the moment...
Transnational list is the idea then.
Yeah, that's I think we are one of the very few countries in which for the European Parliament you can have candidates which are not Italian. You can, in Italy, we pushed very much, and we finally got a law in which, in my country, for the European election, a party can put in the list. Or
in Belgium also.
And now, then Belgium also is like that, and few others, in which a party can put in his own list in Italy somebody whose passport is of another European country. But that was done in a way of trying to mix it up, to really make a sort of European feeling for this election. But this kind of, let's say, democratic process, if you want more integration, has to come to find some solution. Otherwise, it will be seen more and more as a sort of bureaucratic integration, but not a participatory process, which is badly needed.
Parliament is now working on a report on this.
Yes.
Report has normally to be voted next week in the Strasbourg session, where for the first time we launched the idea of transnational list. That means at least 25 members who are elected on the whole of Europe. And every citizen should receive then 2 votes. 1 vote for his, I don't know, 22 I think it is in Austria.
Yes.
Members of parliament of representing Austria. And then he can also have a second vote for 25 candidates presented by different political parties and coming from everywhere. And that can create, it's an element, one element I think, to create this more European public opinion that we desperately need.
But anyhow, what we have been discussing this is how Europe is needed. No? And a different Europe, and etc., etc. Outside from this circle, and broadly speaking, let's say, the language is Europe is the problem, right? And in fact, we are discussing here how to go forward, how to make it more democratic, more effective, sort of. But the general idea is, which has always been a national sport of ministers, When something goes, well, yeah, it's very usual. When something goes well, it's definitely Paris, Rome, Madrid, who has had the idea and who is implementing a fantastic policy. When something is tough or bad, definitely is a sort of a stupid bureaucrat from Brussels who is imposing on us some stupid ideas. So the same political leadership is creating a bad image of Europe every single day. And to go vice versa, that is what I was thinking of, the scapegoat theory. There is always somebody who is the enemy of a good policy. But the strengthening of nationalism is going stronger and stronger. So the only way, it seems to me, is not to defend the status quo, but to make a new proposal for Europe, because the status quo, nobody is willing to defend it. It's indefensible.
If I may just add one thing, because I think you brought in a very valuable point by talking about accountability. I think I'll come back to your point where you spoke about the need for education. There is, of course, great need for education, but that may take a little too long to solve this current problem. So a more practical suggestion is for the educated people to speak out more.
May I comment on that?
That's just to begin with.
Another possibility to educate the political leaders.
When Adlai Stevenson, this is in another day, another part of the world's history, was running for president against the famous General Eisenhower, a woman came up to him and said, "Oh, Adlai Stevenson, all the intelligent people will vote for you. All the people who read good magazines will vote for you." And he said, "I'm sorry to hear it." I'm afraid I need more than that. No, I agree that, but George, the people who think they're articulate have been speaking out. Every issue of the New York Review of Books is chock full of addresses about the remedies for democracy. But it won't work. It may take a bit of time. I'm in favor of starting with the last year of secondary school. But yes, it'll take a while, but the problems are deep. And I keep coming back to the idea, if we want to do this through democracy, we simply have to improve the susceptibility of people to argument, to pause, to spend a moment, and not to be satisfied with slogans. Nothing else will work.
Yeah, but are that contradictory? Because you can even have really people who could dare finally to speak a little bit more and vocal. In the meantime, you have an education priorities. I mean, they are not contradictory, all this.
No, they don't.
And
I'm all in
the
favor.
situation is so bad that you need all the 3 or 4 or 5 possibility.
I want your foundations to speak out.
Yeah. Look, I think you have to recognize that we are in a crisis right now, and you do need a plan B. And the plan B can't be designed by a majority. It has to be designed by people who understand the problems. So you need, in this discussion for a plan B, you need the educated people who understand the issues and can actually devise. Yes. It's really has to be an educated discussion. The education, hopefully, will spread, but you do need people who actually can understand the complexity.
I absolutely agree.
The problem is that the elite today is following the public opinion and not the opposite.
And they form the public opinion. And that's the leadership, because you are talking about leadership. That's the leadership that people are looking for.
Exactly.
There is not a leadership is going is in fact advancing the public opinion, not following the public opinion. Now they are thinking, democracy is following the public opinion. I doesn't agree at all. It is trying to give a vision and then try to convince the public opinion of your vision. That's democracy.
That's leadership.
You're not going to
That's leadership more than
You're not going to have plan A, B, or Z adopted unless there are two steps. First, a conversation, an enterprise among people who know something about it, who are educated, and have the time. That is absolutely essential. But that's only half of what's essential. You need legitimacy as well, or it's not going to work.
You will need eventually Europe-wide support.
Yeah, but you're saying
so the educated people that you're speaking about have also got to be effective in politics, and they can't be effective in politics until politics gets better. Politics is awful now.
But if you look at...
Well, no.
I've seen
it's
worse
true that also those who have a more European vision have to use the same instruments and the same media as the others. So if you today you give an interview, the journalist is asking you to use maximum 13 words, they say. In 13 words you have to say it, because we have no more time. A debate like this, is that still possible on television? I don't think so. They should say, what you think? 1 hour, 40 minutes of prime time. No, that's not possible. So, and I think that maybe the new media, internet and all this, can bring some help in this. Because, let's be honest, what we see in the Bild-Zeitung and what we see on popular TV, I don't think that they are the instruments that we can use really to translate our opinion. And that's a problem today. We have mass media, we're going fast. A debate in a parliament, is still on TV? I've never seen one. A good speech in a parliament of 30, 40 minutes, I like that. I find it fantastic. But that has no influence today. So the mass media are not helpful today in what is necessary for this more difficult, logical, rational European approach. But maybe the new media can help in this. If I see what the role the new media have played, internet and so on, in Northern Africa and in the Arab world, then maybe there is an enormous possibility, because young people and other people are still looking for more information on these new media, and that can be maybe something very helpful in the future. A trick.
I doubt it.
So maybe we've reached close to the end, but maybe we'll have a last word if anybody wants to give a last word. And let me go backwards in the other direction from before. Would you like to leave us with a 17-word message? No, 18, 19.
Well, I like the debate here today. No, really. And I don't think that conclusions are necessary. There is no conclusion for the question, is the liberal democracy in crisis? And it cannot be a question, because if it is really a question, that shall be an enormous fall back in humanity, I think, because liberal democracy is, at this moment, the force and the system that we have to realize everywhere in the world, I think.
Good.
Thank you.
George, do you have a last?
I think that a Europe-wide debate on the need for a European Plan B would actually be the right approach right now.
I want to say, I want to say something eccentric in this context. That is, I came prepared for a debate about the tragic weaknesses of liberal democracy. I found myself part of a debate about Europe and I hope you'll forgive me for saying, no place in the world is liberal democracy in better shape than in Europe.
Like a show. Now, following up, I think you are totally right, but we are so unaware that we are not, let's say, trying enough to preserve it, right? And my final message is that democracy and liberal democracy is a value. And in so doing, it's also fragile. You have to care for it every single day. And it can go further, but it can also go backward. We live in let's say, in a continent that just last century was 2 world wars and the genocide. So let's say we'll better preserve our democracy and liberal democracy, but again, it's not written in stones. Preserving it, caring for it, pushing it forward to the new challenges and new reality needs leadership, needs the commitment, but needs also your commitment. It's not there for granted, and not for granted forever. Thank you. Grazie. We go.
Yeah. There we go. Yes. So,
Yalla.
yeah. So thanks to all our 4 speakers for a terrific debate.